Imposter syndrome can be a powerful force in a client's mind. But what's going on in the nervous system when imposter syndrome takes hold? And what can that tell us about how to treat imposter syndrome? That's what we'll be digging into in this module. So to start, let's look at imposter syndrome from a polyvagal perspective.
So when I think about imposter syndrome, I think about a continuum of experience. And at one end is that crippling experience of always being terrified that I'll be found out as a fraud. And then at the other end is that common experience of wondering if I really have anything important to say. And I really think we all are somewhere along that continuum all the time. It's a common experience. One end, however, comes from a dysregulated autonomic state, a survival state, and the other end, that wondering, if I really have anything important to say, can still be held within the regulation of our ventral vagal system. And in fact, comparison is a natural human experience, right?
That was Deb Dana, and she just shared key insights into how a client's physiological state can influence the experience of imposter syndrome. We'll go more in depth on that as we move along. But for now, let's stay with this idea of comparison that Deb just introduced. As I know you know, comparing ourselves to others can play a major role in the development of imposter syndrome. And according to Deb, there are two specific kinds of comparison. Each one has an impact on our physiological states. Here's how you might help your patient visualize this.
I have this image that I use with clients of two lines joined at the top and then heading down opposite sides. And if we travel down the left side, we move quickly out of connection into competition and into what we call either an upward or a downward comparison. And in a downward comparison, I feel that I'm better than everybody else. And in an upward comparison, I feel that everybody else is better than me. So once we go down that left-hand side, we've left the regulated state of being able to compare with curiosity, and we enter first into that sympathetic fight-flight mobilization. When a downward comparison, I'm better than everyone else and I have to stay there. And then we go into this dorsal vagal despair in an upward comparison where I'll never measure up and everyone's better. And each of these is an autonomic state change enacted as a survival response. So if we looked on the right-hand side, we're able to stay in that ventral vagal regulated space. And the comparison experience brings curiosity, and then we come into deep connection with others. We can see differences without danger. But for many of our clients who suffer from the belief they're not worthy of good things, not deserving of the success they had, they travel that left-hand side pretty quickly. And the story from that left-hand side is a story of where you can never feel worthy and never feel confident. And again, if we think about their biology, it's because they're biologically unable to create a story of confidence and success unless they're in a ventral vagal state, or at least have an anchor in ventral.
When your patient starts to get a sense of how their natural instinct to compare might impact their physiology, that can be so powerful. So I want to give you a closer look at exactly how you might walk a patient through Deb's comparison graph.
Once I've introduced this compare graph to my clients, then we'll take a moment in time, a small piece of story, and we're going to begin to track it through that graph. And we might start with a story of evidence that something good had happened for my client. And then we will go down the left-hand side, which is at that point my client's usual pathway, and we'll start feeling that sense of competition. And what we're going to do is we're going to map the nervous system state, and we're going to notice, we're beginning to feel a bit of sympathetic mobilization. And so we're going to stay with that sympathetic mobilization and say, what's happening here? What's the story that comes out of that mobilization? And the story is usually, I really wasn't that good. I don't deserve to be praised for what I did. Everybody else could have done the same thing. And as we're doing that, we're tracking how sympathetic is deepening and deepening. And then we're going to stop for a minute, and I use timeout a lot.
So after Deb has her client take a brief halt, she's going to help the client pick back up with that sympathetic mobilization.
We're going to really feel that other need that lives in sympathetic first, that downward comparison, which is I have to be better than everybody else. I did this thing and I got some praise, but I have to keep doing it because if I'm not better than everybody else, then, and we will fill in that sentence, which comes from the sympathetic nervous system. If I'm not better than everybody else, if I don't keep working harder than everybody else, then, and we'll let the sympathetic nervous system fill that in. And again, I really do ask my clients, I say, let's let your brain have a rest for a moment. And let's ask your nervous system how it would fill in this sentence.
Now, I just want to pause here so that you can notice exactly how Deb languaged that question. This really matters because it helps the client understand how they might answer from a different place. Now that we're looking at working with the patient's sympathetic nervous system state, let's get into how we might work with the dorsal state, or that state of what Deb calls upward comparison.
In the dorsal place, we'll really feel that everyone's better than me. And even though people gave me credit for what I did, it's never enough. It's never going to be enough. And everyone else can do it better. And so I'm going to not try as hard because it's hopeless. I'm never going to get where I need to go. And even as I say it right now, you can feel the energy in that dorsal vagal place. You can feel the draining of purpose and motivation that happens there. And from dorsal, from that bottom of that figure, it's very hard to go across to ventral. So, my client usually we have to come up through a little mobilization first to cross over to the other side. So from dorsal, I'm going to sit with my client, both concretely in the room and metaphorically. We imagine sitting together and really feeling this hopelessness of ever being able to measure up. And as we sit together and just are in it together, then my prompt is going to be, so what if? I love the what if question. What if your ventral vagal system could speak to you right now? What would it say? Right. And oftentimes it's a little hard to get to that, but I'm going to say, so I'm just going to imagine that if your ventral vagal could talk to you right now, it might say, I think this may be a bit of an intense survival response happening right now. And then clients usually are able to begin to join me in that storytelling, and we'll find what the ventral vagal system might say to dorsal in that place. So we're going to ask your dorsal system, if you deserved to be recognized, then what? Because dorsal has a belief that it's acting in service of your survival, that taking you into this place of giving up is what's needed to ensure you survive. So we're going to ask dorsal to finish that sentence. If you are successful, then, and we're going to see what it says would happen.
Now, as you zero your client in on working from a sympathetic state and from a dorsal state, and as you begin to ask the what if questions, you might get this initial response.
So often it's fascinating because clients, will look at you first and say, oh, nothing, I don't think anything bad would happen. I say, well, that's your brain. Again, let's let your brain have a vacation for the next couple of minutes and let's ask your dorsal vagal state. So let's get in touch with it. It's right there. It's bringing you this sense of needing to not work so hard to give up. It's a collapse state. And let's ask it. And then we'll say, okay, so if I am successful, then, and some of the common answers we hear are, then people will notice me and it's dangerous to be seen. That's a very common one. If I'm recognized for what I do, then I'm going to be expected to be a part of the team, and I'm going to be expected to show up and be seen. And again, it really is a flavor of invisibility that happens in dorsal, a need to disappear because being seen or heard was dangerous. And so dorsal takes us out of that place. It's that cloak of invisibility that keeps us safe. So if I'm going to be recognized for doing something, well, then I'm also going to have to step into the light and be seen. And that can feel terrifying to a system that has been shaped to think that being seen is the dangerous place. These are the people for whom growing up, flying under the radar, being invisible, being quiet was the safe place.
So notice, this fear of being seen or recognized, that's something we touched on in the last module, because this can often come up for people who feel marginalized and who have internalized certain ideas from culture or society. But not only that, this same fear can sometimes trigger imposter syndrome for patients who've experienced trauma. We'll cover that in Module 5 when we look at how to approach imposter syndrome that's rooted in trauma. But right now, let's stay a moment more with this idea that Deb just touched on. The idea that being invisible, staying unseen, and even defaulting to self-doubt can feel like the safest response for many patients' nervous systems.
Our client's self-doubt is this adaptive survival response, right? It's been enacted by a nervous system in response to cues of danger that outweigh the cues of safety. And when we can help our clients see the adaptive quality of that response and begin to understand why their system's responding this way, we can move to identify and reduce the cues of danger and bring in more cues of safety. And as that inner autonomic landscape begins to change and our clients find their way to a bit of ventral, they take in new information and the story changes. So remember, it's only a story from a state of regulation that allows the possibility of feeling successful in the world.
So, what are some strategies that you might use to help your patient regulate?
Oftentimes, we will have created what I call ventral vagal anchors, which are things that we know we can do together that predictably bring a little bit of ventral. For some clients, it's just stopping and looking at each other. It's some clients, it's sighing together. Some clients, it's a hand over the heart, and that, oh yes, my ventral vagal system is here and ready to help me. So we'll stop and do whatever that is with that client, and then we'll come back to the story again and think, okay, from this ventral state, when you look at what people told you and praised you for what you did, what happens now? Because then we've traveled over to the right-hand side of that figure. We're in a state of ventral vagal connection, and we can be curious.
So, for many patients, regulation can often be the key that unlocks the grip of imposter syndrome. And to give them an even clearer sense of why regulation and co-regulation can be so effective in neutralizing imposter syndrome, I want you to hear from Dr. Stephen Porges. As I know you know, Stephen developed the polyvagal theory, and his work investigating the nervous system and its responses has changed the way that we work with trauma. Here's how Stephen thinks about imposter syndrome.
I think the imposter syndrome is people are literally going into a defensive mode that is partially dissociative. So they often are like, here I am standing in front of people, but I'm not really standing in front of people. It's another attribute of the imposter. It's almost like there's a little bit of a dissociative state coming in. And I would say maybe a little, maybe a lot. In recent years, I've been hearing more and more about it from colleagues. And we're talking about professionals who have wonderful reputations, who are loved by the community, but really have the sense that they're imposters. There was a common theme, and that theme had to do with a sense of contribution. They didn't really acknowledge their true sense of contribution to others. It was a sense of their own personal narrative had not matured or developed with their successes. They were still functioning like the child inside of them. And even though they were changing the world with their wonderful work, it hadn't changed them.
So Stephen just gave us two different insights that might help to shape the approach you use to imposter syndrome. First, imposter syndrome can sometimes mimic a dissociative response. And then second, it can happen when there's a disconnect between your patient's achievements or successes and their personal narrative. So when your patient has an outdated personal narrative, how can you help them shift that narrative to match the facts?
The goal really is reintegration, and that reintegration is going to needs the development of a top-down narrative that talks about the fulfillment, the complexity of the journey, the heroic complexity of the journey that puts us all together as an integrated person. So I think that there is this vulnerability of feeling like an imposter, but it's a flag. It's a flag saying, I or the individual has not really acknowledged their presence in the world and their impact on others. And I think it's the latter point, impact on others, which goes back to a common theme of co-regulation. They are in the world co-regulating and contributing to improving the life of many, many others. And that is a interactive, functionally neural exercise. And they need to allow that part of their personality, that part of their body, to take that positive information in to create a positive narrative that enables a top-down integration of those feelings and just basically say that was then, this is now.
Now, this links back to what Deb was saying about regulation just a few minutes ago. You see, in order for your patient to achieve reintegration, to take in those present and positive facts so that they can begin to update their personal narrative, they first need to understand the importance of co-regulating and how to do it. Here's why.
As long as we feel connected with others through those interactions, then we have a type of reality that makes us really not feel like an imposter. In a way, to get out of the imposter mode, you really are grounded. And the metaphor underlying that metaphor is your body talking to your cortex? Is your physiology, are your feelings, your visceral feelings becoming your psychological feelings? So when we respond to others in this wonderful world that we're in which we by nature can be helpful, that act of being helpful, of listening, of witnessing, of interacting is a gift to our nervous system to enable us not to feel like imposters. So what I'm really attempting to succinctly say is, as long as we provide ourselves with opportunities to be authentic human beings, the imposter syndrome will walk away, because it has no place in being an authentic individual. So authenticity in my world is being available to others. So once you make yourself available to others on an interactive emotional level, then that connectedness is the neural exercise that says, I am safe with others. The imposter no longer exists. The imposter was an adaptive function to present in a world in which the individual didn't feel safe. But if you're authentic and interacting and co-regulating with others, you are truly a human being.
For many patients, strategies that help them work with their nervous system to counter imposter syndrome can be life-changing. Now, in the next module, we'll look at how to work with imposter syndrome that's being held in the body. I'll see you there.